Same table, yeah.
You stated that some European nations have innovative stimulus programs to combat unemployment. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm mainly talking about, I'm thinking about Germany. There's been a lot written about this recently, and actually our chief economist, Mark Zandi, is a big proponent of this. And he's helping to get legislation put on the floor to pass this. It's something that they call short-term compensation. 17 states have this in the US right now. Pennsylvania is not one of them. What it does is it's essentially the federal government. In Germany, it's actually the German government. It's not at the locality level, subsidizing people to work fewer hours. So the idea is that if you're an employer and you need to cut your payroll by 20%, you may lay off 20% of your workforce in order to cut your payroll. These people would probably be paid a severance. They would be eligible to collect unemployment insurance compensation, which would be paid by the state initially. What this program does is it says, okay, you want to cut your payroll by 20%. Instead of laying off 20% of your workforce, cut your hours by 20%. Cut everybody's hours by 20%. So everybody still has a job, but now maybe they're working 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And then the employer now has cut the payroll 20%, and then the government makes up some of those lost wages in the form of unemployment compensation. So it says, okay, your wages were cut by 20%. We're going to give you 20% of the unemployment insurance benefits that you would have gotten had you been completely out of a job. So it makes up some of that lost wage. And people that are proponents of this, and I am one, because I think that this is really, there's few drawbacks to this. The biggest argument for it is that it keeps people attached to the labor market. Because what you see in periods like this where you have extremely high unemployment and it's very, very prolonged. I mentioned the average duration of unemployment now is 6 months. We've never seen anything like that. The longer someone is unemployed, the longer somebody is out of the workforce, the less likely they are actually to ever come back in. You lose a lot of people. You lose skills, you lose connections, you lose attachments to being in the working world. From an employer's, so keeping people in the labor market is keeping them attached, keeping them working, keeping their skills up to date. From the employer's perspective, the employer doesn't have to pay severance. The employer doesn't have to then, when business conditions come back, they don't have to go out and pay money to recruit people, rehire people, retrain people. It's instantaneous. If they want to ramp business back up, they have all the people they need, they just have to increase their hours. So from the employer's perspective, it's cheaper. From the employee's perspective, they still have a job. From the federal government or the state government's perspective, they're paying less unemployment compensation than they would be paying if that person was completely out of work and they had to pay the full UI bill. So it seems to be a good idea, and in Germany what we're seeing is this has been in place for a long time. They underwent a very severe economic recession, but their unemployment rate has been falling now for several months. They've lost far fewer jobs than we've lost. The counter arguments to this are, well, this creates, and like any really any jobs program or social program, it creates inefficiency in the system. So it may be in effect subsidizing companies that will never make it. Maybe this is inevitable, it's just delaying the inevitable. You know, maybe these companies eventually will end up laying these people off. And in some countries, actually in the Netherlands, if that happens, if the employer eventually lays off the employee, the employer has to pay back the government for that unemployment insurance compensation that was paid. And then other people would argue, well, if you keep these people working, what about all the other companies that are doing fine and they need to hire people? You're removing people from the available pool of labor that may be hireable by other more profitable, efficient companies. So there's an efficiency argument, but I mean, that is true with regular unemployment insurance benefits too. This seems to be a little less costly than not doing that.
And I would, on that very day they passed that law, why wouldn't I take all my employees and get subsidized by the government?
Well,
What?
there's limits. I mean, you can't just lay everybody. First of all,
No, but why wouldn't every company do it? Because I'm going to take it. See, my question is, how do you pay for it? I'm sorry to interrupt for piggyback. How do you pay for it? And Germany's a socialized medical society, socialized country, basically. If I want to lay off 20% of my workforce, factored into that number is all the money I'm going to save on pension, benefits, life insurance, health insurance. That number you're going to give me won't offset that unless it's a really big number.
no, when a company does this, they are not allowed to reduce benefits. So
Right, so I don't get my 20% savings.
That's right.
Well, then I'll go out of business because I need to cut 20% of real dollars. It doesn't, I'm sorry, I lost the logic of that. If I need a 20% real cost savings of that payroll, just reducing a few hours doesn't get me there, even if you reimburse me.
Well, you reduce hours to get to that 20% though. I mean, usually, and this varies from state to state, there's a restriction on how many hours. There's usually a minimum percentage of hours that need to be reduced. So if you're going to reduce hours by, let's say less than 10%, you're not eligible. There's a minimum number of employees that have to participate. You can't do this with your entire, you can do this with your entire workforce, but it's temporary too. There's a maximum number of weeks for which you can do this. And the point is that you need to prove that this is a temporary downturn in demand and that you're expecting things to turn back around. So these are people that you would have normally laid off temporarily to be recalled or furloughed. So a company like GM can't do this, right? Because it's not going to turn around. I mean, if they did this, their employees would be on this program forever. I mean, they're continually cutting payrolls. This is for companies that are solvent, that just need sort of, let's say 26 weeks, I think is what I'm seeing in a lot of states, maximum, that they can do this for and then bring workers back on the payrolls. But you're right. And well, the other disincentive for employers is that the way the unemployment insurance tax system works, an employer is penalized in the future for laying off workers now. There's the way the tax system is called experience rating. So the government looks at how many people you laid off last year, and if you laid off more people, your unemployment insurance tax rate goes up. And the same thing would happen here. They're not exempt from that. So their tax rate would go up by less because they're not, you know, if you look at it in aggregate hours, they're not cutting as many as they would if they laid everybody off. But that will count toward their experience rating, so the tax rate will go up. So it's not a free ride for employers. They are still taxed on this, and obviously the more they use it, the more their tax rates go up in the following year. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. There's pros and cons for sure on both sides. Yes. Oh, you and then you.
Do you have any data on, I know our economy is in trouble, but is there any data to support that there's actually businesses starting up during this downturn? People starting businesses, so they're not going back into the W-2 workforce, but they're starting businesses?
Yes.
Is there any effect there?
Yeah, there's another survey that the BLS looks at, and they look at the composition of employment. They look at businesses that are just expanding, hiring people, but they also look at new startups. And there's always new startups going on. That goes down cyclically, as you would expect in a recession. But we're not seeing that really perk up to any big degree. It's still very, very low. And it still seems to be more of a case of fewer companies going out of business, fewer companies doing mass layoffs. The hiring, the expanding, and the starting up is still quite low. And actually, until we see that start to perk up, the labor market is still in bad shape.
And as more and more